Hi, welcome to the Bathtub. This is the social distancing episode. This is Bathtub Quarantine, our fourth Bathtub Quarantine. I'll take this off, and the purpose of these Bathtub Quarantine editions is to basically, we here at the Bathtub have been social distancing all our lives. I've been social distancing since I was old enough to take a bath, and the only difference between my life now and the coronavirus is that I go for less. I don't go for long walks as much as I like. But that's partly my crazy dog. She hates to go for walks. So I got the only dog in the world that doesn't like to go for walks. So anyway, we are going to try. I just did this once before. I'm really pissed off because, Apple did an update, and I think they screwed up my microphone. So I did this 15-minute blah, 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 and I have to redo the whole thing. So I'm so pissed off. But anyway, this is a top 10 list. What we're going to do is a top 10 list of big books to read in quarantine. Okay, a lot of people are writing me saying how they're reading this or that, and they're trying to have a really good time during quarantine reading big books. It's a good time to read those big immersive books, the ones that require attention. The reason no one reads anymore is they're working so many stupid jobs, and they play their computer games, and they got a million things to do, and they're worried about the stupid news, and the politicians are stealing everything they can fucking steal out of their houses, and they just can't even focus on a stupid book. So we're going to do a top 10 list. I got the whiteboard here. It's all ready. I've written all this stuff down. I tried to come up with I thought I was going to have trouble coming up with 10 great big books. And I end up having twice as many as I really knew what to do with. So I'm going to go through this very quickly just because I'm so frustrated. I already did this once. My number 10, the 10th great big book to read during the quarantine is Ulysses. And I put it at the bottom of the top 10 list for a reason. Because as you know, I find it a little bit hard work. And it's kind of hard not to feel you're studying it. There's great stuff in it. And you have to read it someday. You really have to reread it 2 or 3 times before you can really appreciate some of the most beautiful passages. But it's also got lots of really terrible passages. I think some sections in it just too long and too clever. It's not my favorite book. But if you haven't read it, it's a good time to read it. And there's some great stuff in it. And you need to read it again. So when the next virus comes through, or when the polar ice caps melt, or Donald Trump gets reelected, you can get to work on a second reading of this. So that was my number 10. Number 9, I took all these books and had to put them back on the shelves. I was thinking of John Barth, because he writes lots of big books, so we've been doing a lot of John Barth. And if I was to pick a big book of John Barth that I've read, I read it when I was 18, 17. The Salt Weed Factor is the kind of most fun, they call it rollicking comic novel. It's a takeoff on the old 17th, 18th century novels. And I liked it a lot. I read it. It's just too long. I'm going to say right here, it's too long. And I feel that way about a lot of John Barth books, and a little too clever. But it has if you're going to read one John Barth book just for entertainment, I think I would probably select this one. At the same time, it's too long. It made me realize that when I think about John Barth, and I think of putting him on the list at number 9, the one that John Barth was very interested in the 18th century novel. Our friend John Frederick of the Black Watch just recently was writing something somewhere about how much he loves the 18th century novels, and I agree with him. I love 18th, early 19th century novels. And the book that influenced Barth was Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. If I had a choice between reading Tom Jones or John Barth's Salt Weed Factor, I would take this any day of the week. This is a hilarious book. You throw away all your literary study books, all that crap, throw it all away. You just read it. It's entertaining. It's hilarious. It's just absorbing. It's a great coronavirus holiday read. And you need to read 50, 100 pages a day, and they will just fly by. So we're trying to get books here that just fly by. So that's 2 at number 9. That's a number 9, but that's a hard 9. That's a really good number 9. I put 2 books down here. I don't normally put poetry on here, but as far as big books, the poet I most enjoyed going back to this year was Elizabeth Bishop. This Library of America edition is a terrific way to go back and reread all of her work, all of her essays. Her short stories are actually kind of interesting, and to reread her beautiful poetry, I think she's a wonderful, wonderful poet. And it would really keep you absorbed for many, many days. I was also thinking of James Merrill's we've talked about it briefly in the past, The Changing Light at Sandover, which is it's a big poem. It's a big narrative poem about this poet and his partner journeying through the Ouija board, and it's parts of it a little over the top, but it's a great book too. But I would pick Bishop, Elizabeth Bishop. That's number 8. Number 7. Now where the hell is it? My whole place is just, oh, here it is. Excuse me. The reason I had to redo this is that the sound was screwed up, and somehow the Apple update erased my microphone, and it had to use the terrible microphone on the Apple desktop. I hate Apple. I'm sorry. Number 7, The Brothers Karamazov. Somebody last week, I forget who it was now, was asking whether it was worth reading Dostoevsky. And my answer, it's a trick question, because when I was 16, 17, it was definitely worth reading Dostoevsky. He was great. And I read all of his books through about 3 years. I must have read every one of his books. And the Brothers Karamazov, it's one of those big, serious-looking books. They treat it like it's some super serious book. And every time you take a literature course, they make you read the stupid Grand Inquisitor chapter, which is the fucking worst, least interesting part of the book. It's a book about these brothers. One of them's murdered their father. The father was a bastard. And there's just constant philosophical argument about the morality of killing people and the way the world is run, and it is a great book of passionate, crazy characters. The books are actually falling off the shelves as we speak. So that's one I would really, really recommend. I like all of Dostoevsky's big books when I was 16 or 17. As you get older, the argument goes, make sure my books don't fall off again. The argument goes, as you get older, you like him less. And I think that's possibly true. But if you have a teenager in the house, I would definitely give them Dostoevsky, because teenagers will love him. But I still think he's worth reading. Brothers Karamazov. A writer I've always loved, we talked a bit about her, Iris Murdoch. Almost all of her books are big. She's the English Dostoevsky. Her characters have big philosophical arguments about the fact they're bastards and why they manipulate people and why they treat people badly. And this was always my favorite, particularly about London. And if you love London, or you're feeling like I am nostalgic about London, this is a great book to read right now. But any of her long books are probably worth reading. I've read many, many, many of them. They're all kind of similar. The next one would be, here we go. When I was 16 or 17, was when I read most of these long books. I read a lot of them. You really need that Manhattan during quarantine, by the way. You got to have it sitting there. The USA Trilogy. There's 1,200 pages, dense pages. It's a beautiful Penguin pocket edition, mass market edition. This is a great book. It's a trilogy, but it's basically one novel about America at the turn of the century. Lots of different characters. He invents all these sort of narrative techniques of like newsreels and pocket biographies, and there's some stream of consciousness bits. But basically, it's all these different people from different classes going through these huge transformative things. It's a narrative book. It is great. Totally absorbing. You can't... This, again, any age should like this. And this is a good book for teenagers. I would really definitely give that to teenagers. That's when I read it. The other book I read as a teenager, which any teenager should enjoy, is if they haven't been ruined by those terrible Peter Jackson movies, which I don't know why I watched them. I've seen them 2 or 3 times. I understand why I saw them the first time, but never see them again. I keep seeing them again. I'm so stupid. The original book was one novel. They divided up into a trilogy so that they could, they didn't know how to sell this book at the time in the 50s. And it's a really wonderful book. I read this at Christmas over a period of about 10 days, and I didn't leave my bedroom. I just didn't get out of bed. I just loved it, and it's definitely a great, great read. So that's number 5, is tied between USA and The Lord of the Rings. Steinbeck. Okay, here, Steinbeck. One of my all-time favorites was always Steinbeck. Again, I read Grapes of Wrath when I was 18 or 19. It's a big book, not as big as the ones we're talking about, but I loved it. And I was always under the impression that he was sort of kind of went downhill in his later years. But when I moved back to California a few years ago, I read for the first time East of Eden, about a family kind of dynasty story. It takes place in Salinas Valley. based a lot on Steinbeck's own family, I guess. And I loved it. It was one of the first big books. Most big books I'm disappointed by as I get older. I love this book, and I think it's really worth reading. I've added here again. This makes no sense why we're putting them together. We're just doing it because. Do I have it here? One of the big books when you think about big, complicated books to read. Many people come to me or suggest or want to ask about William Gaddis's The Recognitions. Gaddis is best known for The Recognitions. I read it many years ago, 2 or 3 times. I like lots of it a lot, and lots of it I find really, really tedious. And I'm not in a hurry to reread that. However, one of our favorite books here at the Bathtub, we've already talked about it quite a bit, is J.R. J.R. rewards a good long soak. You should be in it for a couple of weeks. It's a lot happening in it. You got to keep your eye on a lot of balls. But once you're into this book, it is really an absorbing, great read. It's a great read. Okay, so you'll really, really get absorbed, and you'll enjoy the characters, and it's moving, and it's sad, and it's hilarious. So I would really recommend that before I would do anything else. Number 3, Thomas Wolfe. Again, I'm going back to all these books as a kid I read. So he's best known for Look Homeward Angel, the sequel to Look Homeward Angel. These are all about the same. They're all basically books about a young writer. I touched my face. I shouldn't have done that. A young writer who writes books. That's basic. He had no other ideas. Thomas Wolfe had one idea, which is to write about his life. And Time in the River is a big, long book. Web in the Rock was the third. And the posthumously published You Can't Go Home Again. It's basically one long novel. And I think these would benefit a good soak of 2-3 weeks, if God help us, we get out of it before then. So number two would have to be, I would say David Copperfield would be my number 2 choice for quarantine, especially if you have not read David Copperfield, because this is one of the great reads too. It's just really enjoyable, and I love this book particularly. I'm looking for the book. Oh, here it is. I also thought a book I read about the same time, and I've also reread both of these books, was another big, long, kind of triple-decker Victorian novel, was George Eliot's Middlemarch. A lot slower, more comedy of manners, from a satire on kind of provincial life, and it's just an absorbing read. You won't notice the hundreds of pages slowly going past you. Number one, we have 2 choices. Again, I just trying to shove all this stuff together. Number 1, best immersive coronavirus read while you're trying to stave off the coronavirus is The 1001 Nights. It's great. I think it's 3 volumes from Penguin, 3 or 4 volumes from Penguin. They're wonderful stories. You don't know you're reading them. Again, John Barth's brilliant, but he's sort of playing off a lot of these old narrative games. And this is much better than a John Barth novel. It's very shaggy. It's got lots of kind of repetitive stories. And I'm going through number 2. I've been in the middle of the number 2 for quite a while. And it's just great. You can sit down and really read all of these books over a few weeks. Number 1. This is a trick one, because I was trying to think of what big immersive book do I want to read that I've never really read. And I don't have time to do that because, as I said, my life has not changed. I got the same reviews to write, and I'm writing my short stories and my novels that nobody reads. And so I'm just as busy doing that stuff. So it's not a holiday for me. But if I was working at a boring job and I suddenly could just stay home for 2 months and I had all this free time, and I would probably pick the Proust, the complete remembrance of things past. Please don't write a single note about how to pronounce this guy's name. Proust. I'm going to say Proust. Anyway, these I read Swann's Way years ago, and I have the Moncrieff translation. There's 2 or 3. There's several. I think there's 3 translations of the complete sequence now. I loved Swann's Way. I read it 20 years ago. Always wanted to sit down for 3-4 weeks and just read them all. They're just beautifully written. You're really just entrenched in this lot. You're not entrenched. You're bathed by this mind and the sensibility and this way of looking at the world and the people around him. It's a wonderful book. And the 3 volumes are right here. I kind of been having these stored away for ages. And I just think that I would like, that's what I would like to spend my coronavirus time doing. Finally, that was number 1 plus, because I got to the end of 1 and I realized I left out the great giant books to read. If you have not read War and Peace, it is great. You can't put it down. The characters are wonderful. Pierre is wonderful. Natasha's great. There are passages. I remember the Christmas scenes going through the snow, and just the love affairs and the rages and the obsessions of the characters. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I've always said there's too much war in it. I wish he'd cut a little of the war, but basically, it's a, what is it, 1,500 dense pages, and they will fly by. You won't notice them. The other one, and we have to give him really kind of we're going to give him the top marks for big books, because he wrote 2 of them, Anna Karenina. If you haven't read Anna Karenina, and you want to really just completely forget the world and read some beautiful writing and a great sensibility about this woman and the characters around her, I would recommend this. Okay, so this is we brought out the whiteboard just to show you I wasn't kidding around. I've done this twice now, so excuse me if this. I brought the whiteboard. Look at that. Isn't that? There's a top 10 list with like 15 books on it. How did that happen? So it's top 10 list with 15 books. Number 10, Ulysses. Number 9, Saltweed Factor. But Tom Jones, definitely Tom Jones. Elizabeth Bishop's collected work. The Brothers Karamazov, yes, it's definitely worth reading. Iris Murdoch, any one of her books is big. USA Trilogy, Tolkien Trilogy, Steinbeck's East of Eden. But if you haven't read Grapes of Wrath, you got to read it. Gaddis's J.R., read J.R. I don't care if you read whatever you love, but that's my recommendation is J.R. above all the other Gaddises. The Complete Wolfe is one sweeping, absorbing novel. David Copperfield or any long Dickens, any long Eliot, really, but I particularly like Middlemarch. The Complete Proust, that'll take you through 2 or 3 lockdowns of the Arabian Nights. And above the numbers, he's transcended the top 10 list altogether. Tolstoy's War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and there you go. I've done that twice in the last 35 minutes, and I'm off. Okay, take care of yourselves. Don't get the coronavirus, and we'll see you soon.